Hello, my name's Tom Walker. Welcome to That'll Be the Day. In this podcast, I'm going to be talking to a visually impaired man who's just been appointed as the chief executive of a local blind society. But before we hear from Mark Upton, here's the musical plug. If you like the music at the start of this podcast, it's a track called That'll Be the Day by the Liverpool band The Vow. And as always, at the end of these podcasts, I'll be featuring a track by the band, and to find out which one it is, stay tuned. Now, when I heard that Mark had taken up the role of Chief Executive of the Oxfordshire Association for the Blind, I was keen to have a chat with him. So many issues to discuss, so few senior blind and partially sighted people in the VI sector. And hopefully, on the other end of this Zoom call now is Mark Upton. Mark, how are you doing?
Hello, Tom. Yeah, I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm not so bad, thank you. Yes, how's the lockdown been for you?
Yeah, been a bit mad, really. We actually had a baby during lockdown, so it's been pretty busy for us.
In addition to that major life-changing event, of course, you became the chief executive of the Oxford Association for the Blind as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it's been quite a full-on year. Ever since lockdown, we found out we were, expecting a baby, and then we've had the baby, and then come earlier on this year, I was sort of appointed as chief executive at Oxfordshire Association for the Blind, so OAB. So it's been, a lot has happened.
Before we talk about OAB, Oxford Association for the Blind, tell me a little bit about yourself, Mark.
I was born with a visual impairment, and that affected me in various different ways. But growing up with visual impairment, you don't have anything to compare to. So I kind of didn't really know that much about it until people were pointing it out at school, and I had extra sort of assistance. And so with my sight then, they were enlarging everything and writing stuff down from the board. And I had these big old video magnifiers sat in the corner of the classroom.
I remember them well.
So, which couldn't be moved. And it was all black and white. So that was how my school kind of went. And employment was really hard. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do growing up. So I sort of fell into different things.
You mentioned school there, Mark. Did you go to a mainstream school?
I did, yeah. So both primary and secondary were mainstream. And so I had support throughout. I had learning support assistants, as they were called then, and a QTVI, a qualified teacher for the visually impaired, was supporting me. And because I'd never been to a specialist school, again, I couldn't really compare it. I've met a lot of people who have, and I think there are pros and cons each way, really.
You anticipated what I was going to ask you, actually, was what your feelings are. I mean, I went to special school.
Okay, yeah.
And maybe that's the subject for another podcast, I think.
Definitely. It'd be interesting to hear the different views. I mean, I found it fine in mainstream, but I didn't go on to further education, and I think I probably would have in a specialist school.
So where did work take you then? You didn't go to further education, as you've just said. So tell me about your career, the kinds of jobs that you've done.
Yeah, so all sorts of stuff, really. In fact, so started off really trying to work in retail. So I did a couple of part-time jobs as a youngster in some shops. So I did Argos, which was fun, a Christmas temp. I once worked in a DIY store, which was probably very inappropriate place for me, but and it was a small independent one, so I don't think there was much risk assessment then. And then I sort of struggled, so I was unemployed for quite a while, didn't really know what I wanted to do, didn't really seek support, but then didn't know what support was out there. So I think there probably was, but I didn't know what there was in terms of help to get employment. And then I ended up working for House of Fraser, which the department store down in Chichester in West Sussex. So I worked there for a year. And actually the reason I got that job was because somebody I knew was a manager within the store, and they saw potential in me as my sort of character and looked beyond my disability, which was, I think, where it really that started, and that really had an impact on me, that somebody took a chance and created an opportunity for me. Before that, I had very little self-confidence, very little self-worth. I didn't really know kind of what I wanted to do. had no sort of clue as to what direction or what I could do. In my mind, I was thinking all the things I couldn't do, but actually, that wasn't helpful at all. And so I worked there for a year thinking, oh, this is it now. I'll be working in retail. And that was just when the financial crash happened in 2008. Oh, yeah. So actually I was quite lucky just to get in. Yeah. And then they were making people redundant. And actually, thankfully, I survived through that. But my feeling was, I don't want to do this forever. What do I want to do? And then I found a job came up totally by chance. I was looking on a website of another local society, so at Foresight down in West Sussex.
And that's an organisation that provides services to blind and partially sighted.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so they were called the West Sussex Association for the Blind, and they changed their name to Foresight a number of years ago. And I knew of them growing up as a child, and I knew of their services. I don't even remember why I was looking at their website. I have no clue, but I discovered the job application on there for, at the time it was called an assistant contact officer, and I applied for it thinking there's no way they're going to employ me. I have no experience in this, no experience in the charity sector, no experience in providing services for visually impaired people or anything like that. And anyway, they gave me the job, and I was absolutely amazed. And really, that's I started to grow, to learn, to develop my own skills, learn as much as I could, and that was really where I kind of developed my sort of skills, I suppose, in leadership and in working in the charity sector and working with people. And I love it, absolutely love working with people. And the funny thing is, growing up visually impaired, you soon realise you don't actually know anything about visual impairment other than your own experience. Yeah, I didn't know anything about sighted guiding. I didn't have a clue. I hadn't really met many other visually impaired people. So in a sense, it was a fantastic job, but also it really helped me personally with my own understanding of my own visual impairment and how I dealt with it.
I can fully concur with that, because, when I worked at Henshaw's about 20 years ago now, I actually learned quite a lot of things about visual impairment that I just simply didn't know. So I can fully understand and empathise with the things you're saying. Before I talk about your current job, just wanted to ask you about working in retail, because I've got a small amount of useful vision, and I cannot imagine working in even a small corner shop. So what was it like for you? I mean, just very briefly, what were the challenges and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, so funny thing is, I went for the job not even thinking about that, and then suddenly realised, oh no, how are we going to do this? And at the end of the day, I think it comes down to the attitudes of those who employ you and those you work with, and your own as well. But I have usable vision, so I can enlarge things. I can make things bigger, use magnification, and at that point, I could sort of magnify things quite well and read them a lot more easily than I can now necessarily. But I used had an access to work assessment, and so we had a till system, which was touch screen, very old fashioned for touch screen. There was no way you could put in software on that to make it bigger. So what we did, we used one of these portable, it's not portable, it's a video magnifier that you plug into a laptop.
Oh, I've seen it.
Yeah, so you propped the laptop behind the till, so the laptop was sort of standing up, so the screen was facing me, and the camera was in front of the till, pointing at the till. So, and I used to get lots of people go, "Oh, why are you filming me?" and it was really interesting, and it was problem solving, and that's what we have to do, don't we? When we get a job, we have to come up with creative ways to do things.
And I guess you knew where products were in the store as well. So somebody asked you, I don't know, whatever it might be, you knew exactly where it would be, until, of course, they changed the
layout. That did happen, and that used to frustrate me, because there's the store, and this is so problematic with a lot of shops, just as a customer, they love changing the layouts and bringing in new branding, and you because you learn the layout and you learn where things are, say in the stock room,
Yes.
and in the shop floor, and but then, like you say, as soon as new stock comes in, it's totally changed over.
I'll just tell you this story, Mark.
Yeah.
I go in a pub in Liverpool, very famous pub called Ye Crack. And many years ago, the landlord, a guy called Det, who was a German chap, said to me, Tom, have you ever thought of working behind the bar in here? And I said, Det, I think that could be fraught with difficulties. And his response was, my life is already fraught with difficulties. Whatever you bring to this pub couldn't make it any more difficult. But anyway, I turned his kind offer down. I thought the idea of me trying to serve people quickly at last.
Yeah, I can understand that. And actually, a good friend of mine used to manage a pub as a visually impaired person, and it, huge challenges.
I can imagine.
I mean, I find it hard pouring myself a drink, let alone doing it with 20 people waiting for you, and
at last orders, all drunk, all expecting.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So your current job, then, you've literally just started, have you?
Yeah, so I've been at Oxfordshire for about 7 years now. So I moved up from West Sussex to start a role within the organisation as a services manager. So managing the day-to-day running of the client services. So all things from our sort of information and advice, technology training, counselling, befriending, all those kind of usual suspects. So I was sort of managing the staff and the volunteers. And then the opportunity came up quite recently. So sadly, our current my predecessor had to step down because of ill health. And the opportunity came up a lot quicker than I thought it would. So in my mind, I was thinking, oh, maybe I would do this, sort of step up as CEO in 5 years or so. Give me a bit of time. And the opportunity came up, and I thought, there's no time like the present. Go for it. And they did. The trustees appointed me. Officially, I started on the 1st of April, so April Fool's Day. And it's interesting because obviously being visually impaired and being in the role has created a bit of obviously attraction and interest, and I feel like saying to people, maybe you should come back in 5-10 years to see how good I actually am. But
how surprised were you as a visually impaired person that you were offered the job? Because I don't think it's any secret that there are still many organisations in the VI sector that have fully sighted CEOs, fully sighted senior managers. Now, I've not done the maths on all of this, but I imagine you are very much in a minority as a visually impaired CEO, even in the VI sector. So how surprised were you?
Well, not surprised at this point, just knowing the organisation and knowing where I am. If we went back personally in my own career, and you've told me at the beginning of this journey that I would be, stepping up as CEO, I would have, fallen over with laughter. But I am. Actually, this will make you laugh. Funnily, when I first started, when I applied for the job at Foresight in West Sussex, I was under the assumption, in my total ignorance, that everybody working in these organisations was visually impaired. I just thought it was a kind of done thing, and I was one of 2 at the time in that organisation who were visually impaired. So I was shocked to see the low amount of visually impaired people in the sector at the time. I mean, it has got better.
Do you think the sector needs to do an awful lot more to encourage visually impaired people to work within the organisations? Organisations spend a lot of time telling employers, oh, you need to employ more visually impaired people. Do you think, if nothing else, for legitimacy reasons, they should actually be doing that themselves?
Oh, definitely. I mean, so there's creating opportunities within the organisation, but and also ensuring that opportunities are out there in their local communities as well. Because it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea working in a sight loss organisation, and not everybody's skills. But if we're not doing it, like you say, how can we suggest that other organisations should be?
What needs to be done to improve that? How do you think, that can be changed?
Yeah, I think starting with leadership, things start at the top, don't they, in these things? And I think starting with leadership is really important, and having leaders like myself who are visually impaired in a lot of these organisations. So going back to your previous point, I think I could be wrong here, but I know of 2 other visually impaired CEOs in local societies. One chap up in Scotland, Graham, who's been with Ness, who's been doing it for a number of years. So in fact, I spoke to him recently, and it's really impressive. And a couple of others in the sort of London area. And then you've got, I think, a couple of other organisations which do, but maybe with more of a niche, so more of a focus on children. I think Look UK. I believe that they're
Charlotte.
Charlotte, I believe she's visually impaired. And Alison.
Phil Longworth in Liverpool at Bradbury Fields. Got to give
yes, Bradbury Fields. Yes. So there's a handful. It's probably below 10. But certainly, I don't think any of the national charities do. And I think they don't even have a high proportion of employment rate for visually impaired people. I could be wrong. I think it varies for different organisations, but I think that's important as well. And going back to your actual question, I think we need to create those opportunities. So one thing that we're going to do as an organisation, which we've never done before, is to create an apprenticeship scheme for young, well, I say young, it doesn't have to be young, but for visually impaired people to actually have that chance to fail really and learn and grow. If you don't get the opportunities to, in a safe environment, which I hope we could be, to learn how to adapt your skills and how to grow and how a workplace might work.
The one thing I was going to mention there, you said be allowed to fail. I think we as visually impaired people, when we do find ourselves in employment, are actually held to higher standards than our fully sighted counterparts. I don't know what your thoughts would be on that.
Yeah, and I feel like you're constantly having to justify you being there. It feels like you do have to work harder, and probably from my whole career or my whole time, and I've always felt I need to do as much as possible because redundancy could be around the corner. You never know. And if I know as much as I can, and if I have to, I do certainly feel like I have to prove myself.
You've mentioned the apprenticeship scheme that you're hoping to set up. What other plans do you have for the Oxfordshire Association? I know you're very new, but I guess you probably hopefully wowed the trustees with that. So perhaps you can wow us with your idea.
Yeah, well, I could bring and then my feet will come to the ground. So it's the reality is it's tough out there for charities. Particularly post COVID, there's a lot of challenges ahead, financially and resources, and we all know that demand is going up. Visual impairment isn't going away. So we've got a lot of work ahead. But there's certainly there's key areas as an organisation we need to tackle. One is technology, which is a huge digital divide, which is the buzz phrase. But the fact that a lot of visually impaired people aren't online, aren't using technology, and are missing out. We've had instances recently where people have been left out of things because they're not online, and that is a huge challenge because, as you know, it's not just about getting online. It's not necessarily a financial issue or a resource issue. It's the barrier of learning to use the technology, for starters, so learning the screen reader or the screen magnification or adaptations, and then you've got the barrier of if the websites are accessible. Of course, yeah. So it's going to be a hard, it's a long road ahead, but we need to tackle that. We can't have people left behind.
Now, I don't know Oxfordshire terribly well, although I have been there quite a few times over the years.
Okay.
It's a fairly rural county. You've got 23,000 visually impaired people potentially to provide services to. How are you going to get to them, and how do you arrange for them to meet socially?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one because we've got a centre in Oxford, and it's a really good resource centre. Like a lot of these across the country, we've got a lot of equipment in and things. But if you can't get to it, it's useless. So that is a real challenge. We do utilise local transport schemes, but you're right. Another one of my areas which I need to tackle is being out there and engaging in the community. There are two elements of it. I think that there's one of us providing specific activities and services. So particularly down the sports and well-being, I think there's some specific areas we can do locally for people. But also for us, it's about engaging people in their community. So not just having just a social group for VI people, but ensuring that they can connect with whatever is happening locally, whatever that might be. So if there's a walking group, well, actually we need to connect with that walking group. If somebody wants to go on a ramble, well, actually then, can we help them with sighted guiding technique and getting that person engaged and involved with that group, rather than us providing a specific group, because it's sometimes hard to get those numbers. But it's also important, like I said at the beginning, I've learned so much from other visually impaired people, and the social aspect of just meeting other visually impaired people, getting to know how they cope, how they adapt, what they do, and then just having a laugh at ourselves really is really important. And it's really part of that journey and that process in sort of dealing with your visual impairment, and particularly for those who are newly diagnosed as well. You often think you're alone and you're the only person out there, and I want to ensure that anybody in Oxfordshire doesn't feel that that's the case, however old, however young, that they have an organisation like ourselves, people to talk to and people to share with and share their anxieties. And I hope that the fact that we do have visually impaired staff, and I hope we have more, and I hope we have more visually impaired volunteers, and that can be an example to that life doesn't end when you lose your vision. In fact, for some people it begins, and for some people you wouldn't swap it for the world. It's created new opportunities and a new life for people. So definitely connecting is important.
If my rudimentary maths haven't let me down too much, OAB isn't far off its 150th anniversary. What do you think the challenges are for the organisation in the next 5 or 10 years, Mark? What do you think you'll need to tackle?
I think it's really important that we are sustainable as an organisation, that whatever we do and whatever we do that is new, that I need to know, and I need to share that we can carry this on. And what we see in a lot of organisations like ourselves is that kind of boom and bust mentality. Services come and go because funding comes and goes, and that we've seen that nationally a lot. We see it locally a lot, and it's not healthy for the organisation. I don't think it looks great from the outside for our clients and our supporters. So I want to ensure that we build, and it might be a slower process, but we need to build that strength. We need to build our team up well. So for me, it's about building the team and ensuring the team of staff, volunteers, and etc. are happy and well trained, well looked after, and that we use that as a foundation. I mean, although we are coming up, we're 145 years old this year, I think it is, or next year. So it's we have a lot of history of providing services and providing support, and I want that to carry on. Sight loss will always be around, I believe, and we're going to need local organisations who provide that on the doorstep service, the community service.
Mark, what advice would you give to visually impaired people who may aspire to being a CEO at a local VI organisation, but who may just want employment? What would you say to them?
I think you've got to start with what you want to do and why you want to do it. And I mean, obviously, jobs pay the bills. So working for me is about doing what I'm passionate about and what I love doing. And whether you end up doing that as an employment or as a voluntary role, I think it's pursuing those passions and pursuing those goals and really having to push for it. And that's one of the hard things. You do have to push yourself forward and push yourself into the right situations. Grab those opportunities when they come to you. If somebody offers you something, take it and run with it and really work hard at it to prove yourself.
That was Mark Upton from the Oxfordshire Association for the Blind, and I'd like to thank Mark for his time. I hope you found what Mark had to say as interesting as I did. Okay then, hands up. I'm guilty as charged. When it comes to selecting music, this has got to be the most tenuous connection I've ever made. If all that talk of employment has got you dreaming of what might be, how about For a Dreamer by The Vow?
Newspaper made your success. Your face is a peach and your life it's a mess. That's the story. Rags to glory. And people believe what they say. You signed on a line, then you learned how to play. It was easy. And people believe anything. You're top of the pops and you can't even sing. It's so easy. It can't be that easy. Oh man, that's too easy. Brought to your knees by tabloid sleaze. They're laughing at you. And Kel Surprise, their stinking lies were true. You'll find no place in the real world for a dreamer. There's no safe place in the real world